This episode of the Single Tracks podcast is sponsored by explorebrevard.com. Picture yourself in the middle of 100,000 acres of public lands and over 300 shreddable miles of single track. A place often referred to as one of the top mountain biking towns in the country, Brevard, North Carolina has countless epic adventures for every kind of rider on tap. Whether you love rocky, rooty, technical lines in Pisgah or flowy lines in DuPont State Recreational Forest, or something in between, Brevard has it all in spades. Come discover the place often referred to as the cycling capital of the South. Start planning your trip today at explorebrevard.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Dr. Adam Phaneuf. Adam is a doctor of chiropractic with a degree in exercise science based in Bellingham, Washington. He's also a bike fitter and has studied bicycle biomechanics. Thanks for joining us, Adam.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's an honor to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your cycling background and how has that intersected your education and ultimately your profession?
Well, I started riding as a kid, and then that kind of faded away as I grew older, and then I ended up revisiting bikes in the middle of my undergrad education. I started getting into road riding a little bit, and did a fair amount of dirt jumping as well. I kind of got into those two disciplines.
These are pretty opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to show up wearing Lycra to the dirt jumps. So, but I was studying exercise science, and it kind of was right in line with my interest in riding. I actually even had an opportunity to work on a research project involving time trial positioning, and that kind of it definitely was something that piqued my interest. And kind of stuck with me later on. And then after undergrad, I moved out to Portland, Oregon to get my chiropractic education, and that's where mountain biking really took over for me. I quickly sold my road bike, bought a mountain bike, and got to know a lot of the great trail systems that are around that area. Did a lot of riding over in the Sandy Ridge Trail system and Hood River area. It was a great place to really learn how to mountain bike. And that love of mountain biking just kind of flourished, and ended up moving up to Bellingham, Washington shortly after graduating from chiropractic school. And and obviously the riding here is quite incredible.
It's supposed to be a secret. Every time I mention it, people are like, "Don't tell anybody. We don't want people."
Yeah, don't tell anybody. Yeah, I think the secret's almost out at this point. But
yeah,
mountain biking really took off for me after moving out to the West Coast, and I was seeing patients. I was practicing as a chiropractor, and I was just I kept having early on in my career, I had a lot of patients that were riders. I was plugged into the riding scene. I was, doing a lot of riding, meeting a lot of people who ride, and I was working with a lot of them. So, but I was, kept having these, issues with pain or tendonitis or whatnot, whatever you want to call it. People were having pain, and it was really directly related to riding, and I didn't really have an answer for that. And there weren't really any good bike fitters there weren't really many bike fitting opportunities in town. People didn't really have any place to go. And so I said, well, I'm going to figure this out because I love riding and I love talking about riding, and I might as well get paid for it. So, and I went and did some bike fitting education with Bike PT. Which is kind of a bike fitting education that's based around kind of a clinical lens, and really delves into remedying pain and musculoskeletal conditions through bike fit. And so it ended up really paying off. I really had a lot of success with getting a lot of people out of pain, and gradually I had more and more people come in just to feel feel more comfortable or
Hmm.
improve performance. Started working with a couple of the race teams in the area, and then yeah, things just kind of really took off from there. And been enjoying Bellingham and riding bikes, and bike fitting has been a growing part of my workday. I'd
Yeah.
say it's growing to be it's not it's getting close to 40-50% of the work that I do during the week.
Wow. Wow, that's crazy. Well, and when you were riding just sort of for fun, was bike fit something you ever really thought about? Like, was that something that you struggled with, or like, yeah, or was it? I mean, for a lot of us, it's just like, oh, we just ride bikes and we don't really think about a fit until something is like really wrong. But was that something that you were like conscious of at least?
Not early on, to be honest. It was, yeah, it was kind of a reactive thing,
Hmm.
when I was thinking about bike fit. And I was also really, being really new to mountain biking at the time. I didn't really understand that there's a lot of ways that you can make your bike more comfortable, not just from like a pain perspective, but even from
Hmm.
a handling perspective as well.
Yeah.
So it really, yeah, it wasn't something that I really considered until I was actually seeing it clinically. And yeah, that's kind of where things really started. The light bulb kind of started to turn on, and I
Yeah.
realized that this is an important thing, and there's a lot more to it. And gradually, even after my initial education with bike fitting, there was a lot of self study, a lot of reading research, and kind of developing my own concepts and opinions
Hmm.
about bike fit, and especially how it relates to biomechanics.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned bike handling, and I'm curious to know how important bike fit is to mountain bikers compared to, say, road bikers or gravel bikers. And then even within mountain biking, like are cross country riders going to benefit more from a fit than, say, gravity riders, or is it like a really? It sounds like it's a more holistic sort of thing where you're addressing not just efficiency and pedaling and that sort of thing, but handling too.
Yeah, exactly. I'd say bike fit's equally important between mountain bikers and road riders, gravel riders. Really, cockpit setup is aimed at achieving a lot of different goals throughout
Hmm.
disciplines, but riders generally want to have an ideal amount of control over their handling.
Okay.
And even on top of that, most do prefer to assume the most efficient or comfortable pedaling position on their bike. So,
Hmm.
I mean, whether you're an XC racer or you're riding enduro or you are out for a gravel ride, you want to be in control of your bike and you want to be comfortable on it. And so, bike fit
Yeah.
has a place in all of those disciplines of riding. And it's yeah, maybe it's not to be putting out the most power, but I mean, if you're going to be doing an enduro race and you're climbing 6,000 feet of elevation in one day, you better be ready to be comfortable. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Uh,
what are some of the signs that somebody needs a better bike fit? You mentioned pain, so I guess that's sort of the big one, right?
yeah, the dead giveaway really is the presence of pain. So that is definitely the big sign that you need that you may need a bike fit.
Hmm.
And I like to say that riding can be a lot of things. It could be fun, it could be challenging, but it should never be painful.
Hmm.
Painful is definitely something that riding should not be. But some other signs that you might need a bike fit, they can include like numbness in your hands or feet or saddle
Hmm.
region, even like hand fatigue, shoulder fatigue, and then of course undesirable handling as well. So,
Hmm.
kind of doubling back to the question about gravity riders, even taking a second look at cockpit and even suspension setup
Hmm.
can be extremely valuable. So I don't think that there's really any exclusions with bike fit. It's just different goals that you're trying to accomplish, and there are different things that you can adjust on a bike that are valued more in certain disciplines versus others.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, you mentioned suspension. Is that part of a bike fit that you would actually help somebody tune that up? I mean, it's not something I would traditionally think of as bike fitting, but again, it does seem to fit like with the whole looking at the whole picture.
Yeah, really, we're trying to create a bike that is behaving how you want it to behave and behave
Hmm.
predictably. And so sometimes, if you're not maximizing the value of your suspension, a bike can just feel terrible. Yeah, I do offer services for suspension setup and tuning. Again, a lot of it really is a conversation, and determining, what terrain people prefer to ride,
Hmm.
and really seeing how much of your travel you're using, what's your sag, and really even setting up sag appropriately
Yeah.
is uh, is uh, is not something that's always done. On at the trailhead. So
Hmm. Right. Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting too. You mentioned the types of pain that people have, like they have pain in their arms or their hands, maybe, maybe it's in the saddle area. And it seems like a lot of people, especially beginners, they figure, oh, I need like more padding on my saddle, or like I need some of those gel grips or something like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, it sounds like you're saying really that says you don't have a good bike fit because it shouldn't be uncomfortable, right?
Right, exactly. So yeah, if you're changing components to make something dramatically more comfortable, chances are you're going to be chasing your tail on that.
Mm,
There's always exceptions to the rule, but really, there's a bike fit is really a sum of its parts, and you can see those things add up in certain areas depending on what's going on with your bike fit. So
hmm.
yeah, usually it's changing a component isn't necessarily going to remedy something if you're in the wrong position to start with.
Mm, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So what types of improvements can mountain bikers expect to see from a fitting? And like how dramatic? Do you have like kind of examples or case studies of people that have really benefited from a bike fit?
Yeah, really. I mean, I'd say half of the people that come to me are looking to remedy some sort of pain
Hmm.
that is occurring, and that's a really easy change to see, because either the pain is
Hmm.
there or it's not. Either it's
Yeah.
improving or it's continuing. So I'd say a lot of the cases I see are knee pain, hand numbness, and low back pain as well. And low back pain
Hmm.
is super common,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of the time it's a pretty predictable fix, with at least if it's fit related. So
Hmm.
I'd say 90% of bike related discomfort can be resolved with a bike fit alone. And
Hmm.
then the other 10% of cases need a little bit more of a push with corrective exercise, rehab exercise, and whatnot. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, people can expect to just feel a little bit more comfortable, have less fatigue on longer rides in certain areas, um, and to maybe that big climb right out of the trailhead is a little bit easier, feels a little bit more natural,
Hmm.
and you have a better balance of muscular contraction between quads, hamstrings, glutes, what have you. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of improvements both in remedying pain, but also just making riding feel easier. I mean, you really should, and having it feel more natural. I mean, you really
Hmm.
shouldn't have to think about your bike after you hop on it. You should be able to get
Yeah.
on and then you ride, and then the next time you think about your bike is when you're hopping off. It should just be an extension of you.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds like the goal. It sounds like, I mean, that's what we're all chasing for, right? Is like, yeah, just that feeling of being free on the bike and not having to think about anything other than staying on the trail, I guess.
Exactly. Moving through terrain without really noticing what's underneath you is
Hmm.
is the goal.
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
that's awesome. Well, walk us through the bike fit process. Which measurements are you looking at and how do you actually do it? I mean, I imagine somebody brings their bike in with them and then what?
Yeah. So, every bike fit really starts with a conversation. So I really want to understand what someone's priorities are, and I really want to help them get the most out of their session together. So
Hmm.
I'll kind of leave it a little open ended to start, and just ask them to tell me about the bike. What kind of terrain are you riding on? Um,
Hmm. And are you typically focusing on one bike at a time? So, I mean, a lot of us probably have multiple bikes, and so you would say, this is my mountain bike. Help me get a fit on this bike.
Yes, it would be one bike at a time. Yeah, definitely one bike at a time. It really just allows us to really be really focused and hone
Hmm.
in on a particular fit there. So,
Okay.
yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, we'll chat about the bike, chat about how they've been feeling, and really leaving it a little open ended again allows me to gauge what's most important to the rider that I'm fitting.
Hmm.
And then after we have a chat, we'll, transition into a little bit of a biomechanical evaluation. I'm really just assessing, a rider's mobility, strength, and preferred patterns of movement. So,
Hmm. And is that on the bike, or is that like, you do a deep knee bend and
yeah. So it's off the bike. Yeah, there's a series of movements. Yeah, there's definitely some knee bending and stuff. It's all pretty relative to the demands of riding. So I'm not going to ask. I'm really not interested in seeing somebody squat to the deepest of knee flexion and see how their knee behaves during that,
hmm.
because
Hmm.
we don't really do that while we're riding.
Right.
I'm mostly concerned with probably the first half of a single leg squat,
Okay.
stuff like that. I really want to see how ankle moves, how knee behaves,
Hmm.
hips are working. See how all those different, especially from a hip down component. I want to see how all those different joints are operating and how
Hmm.
what's normal for this person, this individual.
Yeah.
Not everybody moves the same, and I think again I think the bike industry in general is a little obsessive with symmetry.
Hmm.
And definitely there's been some ideal notions of what looks perfect and what is
Hmm.
ideal. And some are backed in research, some are not, some are just, they're that way because it looks good, because it's straight.
Right.
Um,
It's simple. I mean, that's kind of just how our brains operate. Yeah.
Yeah, and we do really want to simplify things and put things in boxes. But there's definitely, with human movement, there's a lot more nuance. And I think there's more than one way to be successful.
Hmm.
And I think, you can see it even at the elite level. Not everybody moves the same, sport to sport. There's a lot of ways to accomplish the same goal.
Hmm.
And so I'm not going to try and force somebody into a position that isn't natural for them.
Hmm.
If their ankle wants to evert a little bit more, and I'm not going to try and fight that. I'd rather have them, undergo the most efficient set of muscular contractions for them.
Hmm.
Because especially when concerned from like a performance standpoint, we don't really want to be contracting extra motor units if we don't have to. We want to use
Right.
the minimum amount of muscular contraction to generate the maximum amount of power output. So,
Hmm.
um, so if we're wasting energy trying to be in what we've traditionally thought of an ideal position, then that's not a great situation to be in. And
Right.
so,
Right.
so yeah, again, long story short, I think everybody's a little bit different, and
Hmm.
I use these series of movements and tests to determine what will possibly look normal for them on the bike.
Okay.
And so that helps me gauge what I'm okay with and what is considered normal as far as, what their pedal stroke looks like. And
Hmm.
then what would not be normal and what we would need to improve upon. So,
Okay.
yeah. And then after a biomechanical evaluation, I'll take a look at the bike, set it up on the trainer, and see if there's anything that's like glaringly obvious,
Hmm.
especially if it's related to discomfort.
Hmm.
Um, there are certain things that I can look for right off the bat, like, for example, like saddle tilt, bar angle, brake angle, stuff like
Hmm.
that would be related to a specific complaint, that I could just kind of take right off the bat and change right away. And then after that, I'll get the person on the bike. We'll do, have them warm up a little bit and, pedal, just a kind of an easy, steady state,
Hmm.
um, gearing, and just kind of get them like a little more situated on the saddle and get warmed up a little bit, kind of see how their body is behaving once it's a little bit warm.
Mm-hmm.
So that they almost want to like start breaking a sweat almost before we really even start to do any motion capture analysis or
Mm-hmm.
any static measurements. So we'll do some slow motion camera stuff. Watch their pedal stroke from the side, from the front. Take some views from the back and see how their pelvis is moving, and really just give us an idea as to what's actually happening during their pedal stroke.
Yeah. Are people surprised, like when they watch the video of themselves and saying, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was doing that"?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely happens on a regular basis. I mean, I think that there's a lot going on all at the same time, and then being able to slow it down and actually see it is really beneficial. And I think it's a really powerful tool for communicating concepts to riders, as you know, because part of a bike fit really is also talking about pedaling mechanics, talking about positioning. Some stuff that does get talked about and covered in formal coaching. But I'm here just to kind of get the ball rolling, get them thinking about that kind of stuff. So it's not a tool that we've always had, or it's a tool that you had to pay a lot of money for. But now you can use a phone to with a tripod, and you can take really quality slow motion capture. So and it's really and then you can send it to them. They can have it right there, and they can see what's going on during their pedal stroke. So it's super beneficial. And I think it's been kind of a revolution to have it in a handheld perspective, and something that's very shareable for people. So and then we'll take some static measurements. I'm looking for a certain knee angle range, as far as how much extension are we getting, at least maximum amount of extension that we're getting through the knee. And it's not a set number, because we have different goals for different people. So, and this comes a lot from, it works in mountain bikes as well, but for example, if you have somebody who races road and they are a breakaway specialist, well, when I fit them, I don't want to fit them to I don't want to fit them to their maximum knee extension when they are, when they're just on their normal saddle position, because they also have a position where they're up on the nose of their saddle. They're in kind of a semi time trial position. And so we do have to meet kind of halfway between those two positions, because they are spending a lot of time training in that traditional saddle position. But it's also really important that they're not blowing their knees up when they're scooching forward on the saddle. So we do see that a little bit in some XC racing, but it's not that common. But my main point is that there's an acceptable range. And it also, we have to take into account, does this person have any previous surgeries? Do they have a hip replacement? Can they not bring their hip into a lot of flexion? Is that a barrier for them? So then we can set them kind of on that more open knee and hip angle end of the range, and they still won't develop any like pain or dysfunction. So there's definitely an acceptable range for that kind of knee angle, which is what a lot of people are most concerned about. That's like the element of bike fit to look at. For most people. That's kind of what they would think of first is, how much knee extension do I need? So, and then we do, kind of, once we've kind of worked from the hip down, we'll look kind of forward. So we don't really make any compensations or accommodations from the hip down to fix cockpit. We want those pedaling mechanics to be sound, and then we kind of evaluate from the hip forward from there.
Okay.
So, and really we're looking, making sure we have, bar angle correct, that brake angle reflects their terrain selection as well.
And that's a tough one, knowing where to put the brake levers.
Yeah, definitely. And that's there are a lot of opinions on that. And I think that, there's a lot of right answers for brake angle. So, I don't think there's one right answer. So You really like, and it really helps to be able to have, again, it's all part of that conversation that you start with. And you're, determining what kind of terrain are they riding. Are you riding really steep terrain? Are
Hmm.
you just doing, Wednesday night worlds for XC racing? Or are you just kind of riding a little bit of everything? So,
Yeah.
and it also depends, are you jumping your bike a lot? Are you just looking to absolutely like smash through rock gardens? There's and there's a lot that kind of goes into determining brake angle. Usually, we're kind of making some sort of accommodation for a variety of terrain selection.
Yeah.
So,
You're making me realize that we do a lot with our bikes. I mean, I hadn't even thought of how do you fit a bike if you're planning on doing a lot of jumping, or now the question is what kind of jumping? I mean, are you doing,
yep.
huge stuff, or is it slope style? Is it free ride? Is it just you're on trail rides, but sometimes you like to get a little air? I mean, yeah, we really demand a lot out of our bikes and our bodies too. And to be able to like quantify all of that and optimize it seems near impossible now that we talk about it. Like I'm not sure how it's even possible.
It is a lot. It is a lot to take in, and I think that recognizing that bike fitting is a collaborative relationship
Hmm.
between the fitter and the rider is a really important thing to understand.
Yeah.
This is usually we have, feedback is very, very important, especially like again with the way the nuance of cockpit setup is concerned.
Hmm.
There's it's kind of, we often do follow-up visits, and we say, well, how'd that feel, what kind of stuff have you been riding lately, how does your wrist feel with that,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah, feedback is a very, very important component of fit relationship with a bike fitter.
Hmm.
It's a two-way street for sure. So
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to give somebody a suggestion and expect to meet them halfway. So
Right.
but yeah, I mean, brake angle, I mean, it can again, that can vary a lot. Same thing with bar width. It's really dependent upon riding style. Some people
Hmm.
have a lot of, they ride with a lot of shoulder retraction. Their torso's, closer to being like kind of parallel with the ground.
Hmm.
Other people are a little bit more upright.
Hmm.
And there's people across all disciplines doing any of those two things within a whole range of body position, and
Yeah.
a lot of people do it successfully. So um, um, there's a lot to kind of take in and
Hmm.
understand regarding even how somebody decides to position their body, and that's
Yeah.
going to help determine our brake lever angle, determine bar width, even like bar, do we need a bar with a little bit more sweep? So
Mm.
yeah, there's a lot to cockpit adjustment, and it's I think again, having a collaborative relationship and having being able to digest feedback and turn that around into some sort of positive change is something that everybody should look for in a
Yeah.
bike fitter.
Yeah. That's interesting too, because I think a lot of us maybe assume that it's all comes down to like body measurements, right? So if I can show you how wide my shoulders are, how long my arms are, then you can tell me exactly what bar width I need. But as you're saying, it comes down to style as well. I mean, I may have the exact same body dimensions as someone else, but the types of trails I ride or the type of riding I do, or just, what feels comfortable to me is going to be different than someone else. So it has to be a very individual process.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, yeah, the take home on that is there are no hard and fast rules on some of these measurements.
Hmm.
It's and there honestly, yeah, sometimes there's some trial and error. But
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I think that the biggest goal really is just to kind of get the bike out of the way and
Hmm.
let people move the way that they want to,
Hmm.
and have that bike become an extension of you, without putting your body in a position that's counterproductive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how much does a bike fit generally cost, and how long does one usually take?
Well, I'd say depending on the bike fitter, you can expect to probably pay somewhere in the $200 range for a professional bike fit.
Okay.
Sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. Also depends on kind of the services that you're looking to have
Hmm.
during that bike
Right.
fit. So, if you're going to talk about suspension setup and tuning, it's probably going to be a little bit more expensive than that.
Hmm.
My price range kind of varies between like 180 to about like $240,
Okay.
depending upon the bike. And yeah, you can generally expect the fit to take about an hour, but sometimes kind of goes a little bit longer towards the 90
Hmm.
minute time frame. Again, depending on the bike, depending on what we're trying to accomplish, how many
Right.
things we're trying to remedy, and yeah, it allows us to really and taking a good amount of time with somebody is really, really important. And again,
Yeah.
like setting aside that time to have a conversation in the beginning is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the cost too. I mean, to some people, it might, I don't know, it might seem like unnecessary expense, but then we're going to talk in a minute about component swaps and things like that. And, if you're having saddle pain and you're like, well, maybe I need a new saddle, and you buy another saddle and that doesn't fix it. And, you try wider bars, or, there's all kinds of things we can try on our own. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So it seems like it's a good investment probably to have a professional help you with that and figure out exactly what you need to dial in a comfortable fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Taking away some of that ambiguity from the
Hmm.
get-go can be a really, really helpful thing to do. So the especially people go chasing the right saddle for so long when
Yeah.
sometimes they just need a better width than what they've
Yeah.
been choosing. So and components in general, it's there's so many options out there.
Hmm.
I think that we're trying to the bike industry offers it's trying to offer more for people.
Hmm.
More is always viewed as better.
Right.
Right. So but within that, I think that people can get bogged down in certain ideas, or they're kind of blown away by all the choices and they don't even know where to start. So
Hmm.
again, working with a bike fitter and having starting that professional relationship can really help kind of narrow down your options. And maybe you're changing something that you thought you never even had to, and you can use a lot of the components that you already have on your bike. So
Oh, right.
yeah, that's another big goal with most riders that I work with, is say like, okay, well, what can we do with what we have right in front of us?
Hmm.
Let's see how things change without buying a new bar or without buying a new saddle. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, because people can go chasing their tails buying components, and all of a sudden you're $500 deep and you're no better off than when you started.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, it seems like traditionally bike fits were focused on efficiency, and it was racers in particular who were interested in this and obviously would benefit from it the most. But it sounds like your approach is different. I mean, you're all about sort of making the bike disappear, looking for that point where you're comfortable. And hopefully while you're comfortable, you're also more efficient. But, um, what's sort of the mix with your clientele? Are most of them racing, or a lot of them just recreational riders who are looking for a more comfortable fit?
I'd say it's a big mix. I definitely have some clients that are more performance oriented,
Hmm.
whether it's with mountain or out on the road. And then that we're looking for basically the most powerful output. With the performance client, we're looking for the most powerful output that is not causing pain. So we're really trying
Hmm.
to push that envelope. Um, but a lot of times that comfort, and especially in the mountain biking world too, that comfort can blend together with performance. And I mean, same goes for road riding, but there are some exceptions that we do have to make. I mean,
Hmm.
the best time trial position is not going to be something that you can do for 3 hours.
Right. Yeah.
So at least the fastest one. So.
Hmm.
Uh, but with mountain biking, I think there is a lot of crossover between performance and comfort. So, and yeah, again, the biggest thing is we just need to get the bike out of the way. We want it to be
Yeah.
just kind of an extension of you, and it's just a way to move through terrain. So,
Hmm.
and really comfort, efficiency, handling, they all play a part in making that happen. And
Yeah.
they're all interrelated to one another.
Interesting. Well, we kind of touched on a number of the different component swaps that may be necessary or that people can benefit from. So I guess I'm curious to know, like, what is the component that people end up needing to swap or adjust most often? Like, what's the thing that on stock bikes, like it doesn't fit for a lot of people for whatever reason, or what's the thing that people kind of end up getting a lot of benefit out of swapping?
Yeah. I would say shoes are actually kind of in the conversation
Huh.
there.
Interesting.
I have a lot, especially when you're talking, clipless shoes,
Hmm.
there are a lot of people who, there's a lot of brands and they all have kind of different styles of fit. Some of them have reputations for being a more narrow fit and some have reputations for being a little bit more roomy in the toe box. Um,
Hmm.
there's I see a lot of foot discomfort with shoes that are a little on the narrow side, or
Hmm.
with cleat setup that can create discomfort in a shoe that maybe it's a little small, but there's people can be a little bit more sensitive
Hmm.
to the width of a shoe and the construction of a shoe. So I'd
Yeah.
say shoes are definitely in that conversation. I'd say saddles are a big one though. I mean,
Hmm.
that's like, I'd say, it's one of the any of the contact points on your bike are really going to be some of those primary component changes.
Hmm.
But saddle, I'd say, is probably one of the bigger ones. It's very dependent upon, the width of your ischial tuberosities, which are, kind of the bones that you sit on. Um,
Hmm.
and then some saddles have more cutouts or decompression engineered into them, and some don't. And a lot of
Hmm.
people can, especially with mountain biking, where you're kind of riding a variety of grades. You're riding anything from flat terrain in one ride. You could be riding really flat, undulating terrain, and then you could go up some really, really steep grades. And so
Right.
some people are a little less tolerant of not having proper decompression in their saddle. Other people
Hmm.
are, they can ride anything, but I'd say, the saddle can be a bit of an issue. I mean, once we've established that it's not a tilt issue, and
Hmm.
that it's more of a width issue or a taper on the saddle, or it's just a lack of decompression, then we can kind of move forward from there. But I'd say people probably change saddles more frequently than any other component of all the people
Huh.
that I see. And a lot of times
Yeah.
too, it's just a saddle also that is just long past the end of its life. Saddles,
Oh,
break
interesting.
in and they break down. And so, yeah, if you can flex that saddle down, if the middle of the saddle feels different than the back or the end of the saddle, if it's
Hmm.
much more flexible, much more squishy, and you have a year or two on it, it's probably
Hmm.
time to change the saddle. And I'd say that
Oh, that's
that's
interesting.
that's definitely a very common component change, is just saying we need to call it with this saddle. It's done.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I never thought about it, but that's just like running shoes, Like the
Yep.
foam just kind of breaks down and after a while you got to get new shoes. I mean, for shoes it's a year or less, and depending on how much you're riding, you're putting a lot of your weight onto that saddle and it's doing a lot of the work.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, shoes. I mean, you're looking at, it's like for a running shoe, you're looking anywhere from like 300 to 500 miles.
Mhm.
And then, riding, people can bag thousands of miles. I mean, an equivalent amount of hours uh, in a year as to what 300 to 500 miles of running
Yeah.
would take. So, it's no surprise that saddles they can wear out fairly quickly for a lot of people.
Mhm. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So, how can you tell if your handlebars are too wide? It seems like mountain bikers for a long time now, we've been saying wider is better. We want really wide bars and short stems, but at some point
hmm
they got to be too wide, right? So how do you know when your bars are too wide?
The age old kind of adage of, if you're clipping trees consistently, then your bars are probably too wide, definitely rings
Yeah,
true.
that's how
We'll
I
just
go
get that
too.
one out
But
of the way.
Yeah, that's my rule of thumb. But the problem is all my trails are so narrow here. I'd be running like 600 millimeter bars, and
Right?
that's not going to cut it.
Yeah. So, it really bar width, it does have a lot of nuance. You have to look at, look at your riding style.
Hmm.
And what you really like to ride? Are you kind of just, do you really like just like smash down trails and be
Hmm.
in that kind of retracted shoulder position constantly? Well, then a wider bar is probably going to suit you a little bit better.
Hmm.
Are you looking for a combination of, are you trying to improve your handling a little bit? Is If your bike is feeling a little sluggish, or if you're, having trouble negotiating all the switchbacks on your local trail system
Hmm.
without hitting your knees, then, we might be looking at a shorter bar. Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of nuance, but I think that most people can run a little shorter than what comes stock for them, or what they
Hmm.
what they
Okay.
what they try and run.
Yeah.
There's a whole range of proportions and whatnot. So there's no hard and fast rule. I know there's a lot of opinions and even some formulas out there for determining bar width.
Hmm.
But they're all based on assumptions about body proportions and bike geometry, and those
Yeah.
just vary so much. So wider isn't always necessarily better.
Hmm.
But there are even big riders who probably could use more than an 800 millimeter bar.
Yeah.
So
I've
that can
tested
be.
bars with 820s. I mean, they keep going up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think those, especially those extremes, have been
Yeah.
underserved in the past for
Hmm.
really big and really small riders. And I think now that we're kind of starting to see that economy of scale kind of improve,
Hmm.
um, and more people are riding, I think there's more offerings for things that match.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at any like pro lineup, whether it's like a downhill race, enduro race, cross country race,
Hmm.
the bar width is all over the board,
Hmm.
and a
Yeah.
lot of it has to do with proportions. And again, some people just really like being in a really retracted shoulder position.
Hmm.
Um, the the problem that we run into is when we go too wide, we do start to get into this position where we're in such a deep shoulder retraction from the get go, just to be in a balanced position on the bike, that we're
Hmm.
actually losing leverage from our shoulder. We're actually
Hmm.
putting our shoulder at a mechanical disadvantage, and that's something that I try to look for when we're fitting like somebody with who has wide bars and who's like either complaining of shoulder pain or is looking to improve their handling. Those wider bars really do, they facilitate a lot of elbow bend right off the bat.
Hmm.
So, and
Yeah.
if that's not what they've, if that's not how they like to move, or that's not their position in their riding style, then that's something that we have to change. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you make a good point that a lot of folks maybe could go a little narrower than whatever their stock bar is. And I'm sure that's on purpose, right? I mean, bike companies are going to put the widest bar that they think people are going to need, and then
right.
obviously you can cut them down. But I guess a lot of us don't think to do that. We're like, I paid for this whole bar. I'm not
Yeah.
taking any
Yeah.
pieces off of it.
I am not letting one piece of this go.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think bike manufacturers, they're trying to serve the most people, so
Hmm.
they're not gonna spec a bar that's going to be too narrow for
Right.
a handful of people. They're going with the greatest common denominator,
Hmm.
and then I think there is some expectation that we fine tune bar width as we go. And it can be something, you don't have to bite off a lot right off the bat.
Hmm.
You can experiment with it a little bit, and you can make small incremental changes. I think that, especially in bike fit, if we do have to make a large change, if there's a big change that we have to make during our session, often I won't make that entire change right away. We'll kind of meet halfway, and we'll get some time on the bike, and then we'll come back and revisit the fit, and then kind of make some more change.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
So
sense. Interesting. So, I'm curious to know if you have a rule of thumb for setting seat height for mountain biking. And obviously, these days, most mountain bikes are going to have a dropper post. And so you're going to have multiple positions that are available to you. And, some of the rules of thumb that I've heard are, um, you want to start maybe to find your seat height, put the seat at the height of your hip. And then there are other things you can do to like measure different formulas or things like that. Do rules of thumb like that work, or is it more sort of situational and personal depending on the rider and what they want to do?
It really is situational and personal, depending on the rider.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom bracket height really varies. So a lot of
Oh,
that
right.
kind of hip height
Yeah, it
can be
depends
a
on
little
your bottom
deceiving.
bracket.
Yep, yeah. So even like it can depend on how big your tires are that you're running. So bike fit, and again,
Right.
bike fit it's millimeters matter. It's that large variation can really have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
Even that small of a variation can have an impact. So
Mm-hmm.
another one that's out there is sit on the saddle, and you should have a straight leg, and your heel should touch the pedal.
Hmm.
But that again, that's really dependent upon the stack height of your shoes.
Hmm.
Are you running flat shoes, or are you running clipless shoes? Because clipless shoes
Oh,
have
yeah.
some, they have some plantar flexion, which is kind of like toe down position a little bit
Mm-hmm.
engineered into them a lot. They don't have a full heel like a flat pedal, a flat shoe would. So
Mm-hmm. Right.
a lot of those things will get you somewhere, but even despite that, it won't be close enough.
Mm-hmm.
I know that
Yeah.
sounds kind of elitist, but and here you're asking a bike fitter that
Right.
if you can do a rough setup, but I'd say you can use that as there's a lot of things you can use as a general guide, but the more time you put on a bike, the more you're going to notice that those kind of discrepancies between what's ideal and what's kind of a rough setup.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
yeah.
And with a dropper post too, is it ever, I mean, when you're setting up a dropper post, you're basically just considering the two extremes, right? You're assuming people are going to ride it either fully extended or fully dropped. And in the fully dropped, I guess you're assuming that they're not sitting on the saddle, right? So really you're just optimizing it for the top position. Is that right?
Yes, optimizing it for the top position. Occasionally, I have people come in that they're like, "Yeah, I like to kind of just run it just a touch lower than the top position." Um, but mostly, yeah, people they come in and they've been they run at the top position, and that's their pedaling position, and they drop it
Mm-hmm.
down. I'd say you know fitting dropper posts has overall, I'd say you know. Fit hasn't really been affected by dropper posts until very recently.
Hmm.
And I mean, aside from maybe, an extra lever crowding your cockpit, back
Yeah.
when everybody was running a front derailleur and a dropper post. I
Right.
mean, and we even have, suspension lockout levers now. But I think one by drivetrains have really solved some of those cockpit crowding issues. So,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
yeah, fitting a dropper post used to be pretty simple because we only had 125, 150, maybe 170 mils of travel
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
back several years ago. At the time, there was lots of room for adjustability, without worrying about maximum or minimum seat post insertion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, but now it's like we have 200 millimeter plus droppers out there, and
Yeah.
we have people trying to spec them on legs that are not long enough, or bikes that weren't really
Right.
designed for that much post.
Yeah.
And I mean,
That's
I had
interesting. Yeah, people are using you as their consultant, I guess, in some cases, saying like, "Hey, what's the longest dropper I can fit in this thing?" Because the math is complicated. It's not. It's
yeah,
not like you can just,
you
there's
can't
no
just
easy answer
you
because
can't
we're
just
all
chuck
have
it in
different
there.
legs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had a case just last week, and they came in with a 185 mil dropper. They kind of built this bike up, and really, I mean, this is also kind of speaking to the pandemic situation with the scarcity of bike components
Yeah.
in general, which does present its own set of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
But they had a 185 mil dropper post in their bike, and they had it totally slammed, like collar to frame, and
Yeah.
and their seat was too high in the top position. And
Right.
so we had to, luckily, it was a big bike component company, and they, have, shims available to kind of reduce the travel in their post. And
Hmm.
so we had to have a conversation about, well, how much do you think we need to shim this travel to be able to make this post work?
Right. Yeah.
And so, it's nice that a lot of companies are offering, shimming options. Because
Hmm.
I think we are kind of running into some of those, like, let's have the most travel in our post as possible.
Yeah.
And we can chalk it up to part scarcity a little bit, but we can always put a little bit of the blame on the idea of more being more. So,
Right. Yeah.
and that's not unique to mountain biking, but it's
Right.
definitely pretty prevalent in mountain biking.
That's a perfect example of what you were saying earlier about how the fit process works. Like, seems like that would be a red flag. Somebody brings their bike in and you see that seat post is slammed as far down as it can go. And, either they were really lucky and they got exactly the right,
Yep.
right size post, or there's a chance that it's going to be too tall for them.
Yep. Yeah, and it's definitely not an uncommon thing to see.
Yeah.
So.
Well, what's the best way for folks to figure out the proper bike frame size? A lot of people are ordering bikes online now, and a lot of brands, they talk about sizing in terms of like overall rider height. They might have a chart that shows if you're this tall, this is what size you need. But are there other sort of key measurements that buyers should consider in addition to just kind of going off the how tall are you chart?
Yeah, in general, kind of doubling back to the dropper post thing, bike manufacturers are really generally doing a great job kind of speccing the right frame size ranges with
Hmm.
appropriate dropper travels.
Yeah.
And then, with frame sizing, I think height is, kind of like in the realm of bars, but height is generally a pretty good predictor of inseam length.
Okay.
So typically it's a relationship that works quite well in sizing a bike.
Hmm.
It works good enough. There,
Right.
there
Yeah.
are always exceptions to the rule. There are really lanky riders. There's riders with really long torsos and short legs. And
Hmm.
then there's also, there are certain brands that do have reputations for building longer bikes, shorter
Hmm.
bikes. And I think there is that, that riders do have to do some of their own due diligence and kind of researching the way that bike companies size their bikes, and
Hmm.
paying attention to reach numbers. I think that riders are more savvy than ever, so
Hmm.
those numbers matter more to people than they used
Hmm.
to.
Yeah.
And I think that it's also a really good reason to have a good relationship with a bike shop, and trusting their knowledge of the companies that they sell.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, I once went in for a bike fitting many years ago, and after doing all the measurements and everything, the fitter basically said, "Yeah, like really this bike is not the right size for you. I mean, this thing it's a little too small, and there are things we can do to adjust it." In terms of like getting a different stem on there or things like that. Does that happen often where you find that people just have totally the wrong frame size, or are you able to kind of make it work for them?
It does. It does happen. I'd say it happens a lot with road. I'd say it's easier to remedy with a road bike, because
Hmm.
you can alter stem length a lot more, and not really sacrifice handling
Uh-huh.
as much on a road bike. But I mean, you change your stem length by 20 millimeters on a mountain bike, and it's going to either feel like, I mean, typically with how mountain bikes are set up now, with really short stems, you add 20 millimeters to that, and it's going to feel super tracky.
Hmm. Yeah.
Especially you pair that with the wide bars that it probably came with, and
Hmm.
you're going to feel like you can't turn that thing.
Yeah.
So there's less accommodation that we can make with mountain biking. But and it really affects those people who are kind of those in between sizers. Those
Hmm.
people who are 5'10", 5'11", or they're 5'4", 5'5". They're kind of in between all these different size ranges.
Hmm.
And And, I think generally people tend to err on a slightly bigger bike. If they are in between those
Hmm.
sizes, and I think that's generally good advice. I think,
Hmm.
if you're in between, unless you have a really playful jibby riding style, which there are plenty of guys in town that I know do, and they like to run a smaller frame size.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, again, like having a conversation with someone and having them be honest with what kind of riding they like to do. And
Mm-hmm.
if they are kind of in between those sizes. So, I mean, you're not going to, if you're in between a large and extra large, you're going to pick the large if you jump your bike all the time. So,
Right.
it's, but if you're smashing trail and you're just looking to go really really fast in a relatively straight line, then you can err on the longer bike. So
Hmm.
it's kind of a challenge for some of those people that are in between. And then there's some accommodations that we can make during the fit. We've had a lot of progress in mountain bike frame geometry, so
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing steeper seat post angles, so that reach while pedaling really isn't an issue. It's more about
Hmm.
how that bike's feeling while you're descending. So
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
so again, like, yeah, this whole, there's definitely some ideas in bike fitting with, like, this ideal like knee over pedal spindle. It's always been there. And really, like with most modern mountain bikes, the knee's always ahead of the pedal spindle. Like, you can't get it anywhere close to that. And I mean, people still don't have knee pain despite that. So,
Yeah.
so we can kind of make some accommodations, with, saddle fore aft a little bit in those cases. It's not common. It's not something I like to do generally. But there are definitely some tweaks that we can make to bike fit. But a lot of the time it's just, you got to get that frame sizing right.
Hmm.
And if you're on a really big bike, there's not much you can do to change that.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, what are some of the challenges to fitting extremely tall or short riders? One of the things that we recently looked at in an article was crank arm length and
Mm-hmm.
how that's kind of a standard thing. I mean, whether you get a small or an extra large bike, they're all going to ship generally with the same cranks on them. So, are there certain things that are more challenging for riders who are at either extreme end of the size spectrum?
Yeah, definitely at both ends of the spectrum, we see challenges. I mean, going straight to cranks, a lot of it's, there's just, not as many offerings for smaller riders.
Hmm.
And then we're also looking at like ground clearance. I think that,
Right.
if possible, we would run cranks that are a lot longer. It would give a much more stable
Hmm.
platform while descending. But
Mm-hmm.
pedaling those cranks that are any longer than kind of the parameters that we're working with would, just create a lot of pedal strike issues, especially
Yeah.
with how long and low these bikes are getting. It's
Mm-hmm.
we can't really. It's hard to justify running a longer crank unless you're never
Hmm.
pedaling. So I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it's something. And again, it's also like economy of scale, right? If there isn't enough demand for that kind of like shuttle only cranks, then it's just not going to happen. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that we could, I mean, you could go longer with cranks, but I don't think that it's, based on the parameters involved with pedaling and bottom bracket height. It's just, we're kind of constrained by that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I don't think that it's necessarily ideal for descending mechanics, but it's the best that we can work with.
Hmm.
And then, you can also talk about, stance width as well, kind of in that conversation. I think
Hmm.
smaller riders have a tough time. Small and big riders really have a tough time getting that stance width correct. I think that if there was some accommodation, more options for spindle width, I think that would be, and
Uh-huh.
like even just like uh, you know, crank spacing. I think
Mm-hmm.
that it would be a lot easier for people on those extreme ends of the spectrum to be more comfortable.
Hmm.
Because ideally, you want, it would be nice to be able to, line up the hip over the pedal. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it makes biomechanical sense, and there's just not a lot of options for people that again have either really wide hips or really, really narrow hips.
Hmm.
A lot of time, we're getting into, especially with like the bigger spacings. It's, we see a lot of people with pedal spacing that's probably on the wider side.
Hmm.
It doesn't necessarily generate pain in all cases, but I have seen some cases where there's, a smaller rider with knee pain, and we're just doing the best that we can to narrow that stance width as much as we can. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I guess it's really noticeable if for anybody who steps onto like a fat bike, where you
yep,
have that super wide stance and it is a lot different for sure and can cause some pain.
that Q angle is really dramatic on a fat bike,
Hmm.
and there's a fair amount of people that just aren't tolerant of that. And that's, it's just kind of a harsh reality of that wider spacing. So,
Yeah.
another thing that, that we used to have, we talked about bar width already with bigger riders. I think
Hmm.
there are some taller riders out there that, that could do for a wider bar, and they just don't have that kind of availability. Um, and then, it used to be C-tube angle used to be a real challenge for larger riders as well.
Hmm.
We used to have these more relaxed C-tube angles, and they would just be so far off the back of the bike by the time they're in a
Oh, right.
correct position that, yeah, the balance, climbing would they just be, their climbing position would just be really, really challenging. They'd always
Hmm.
be fighting to keep that front wheel on the ground. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely something that has improved with all these, more modern, all mountain enduro kind of trail bike geometries, with those steeper seat tube angles, and that's really helped out the larger rider population.
Hmm. Yeah. Cool. Well, one of the things that sounds like it's unique about your approach to bike fitting is that you also provide recommendations for corrective exercises. So I think in the past and even still today, a lot of bike fitting is done like in a bike shop, whereas yours is done in more of like a clinical setting, I guess. So why combine the two? Like, what are the advantages? What are you able to do given like kind of this approach to bike fitting?
Yeah, so, a fair amount of the individuals that I see for bike fits are dealing with some sort of discomfort, some sort of pain, and
Mm.
a lot of the times the bike changing the bike fit alone will again remedy that issue. But
Hmm.
sometimes we've kind of gone so far down a road, or they're a multi-sport athlete, and the musculoskeletal condition has just kind of gone beyond what the bike fit itself can remedy. We have like an active tendon issue or whatnot, and
Yeah.
we need to give it a push with rehab exercise and corrective exercise.
Hmm.
So, and that will help them kind of get out of that a little quicker,
Hmm.
and or it will be the answer to getting them out of pain, and then they'll be in a better position on their bike once, while they're working on these, on kind of strengthening the musculotendinous complex,
Hmm.
and improving. Sometimes we do need to improve biomechanics. Like it was a problem,
Hmm.
that created some of this issue, but the bike wasn't helping either. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so there's definitely, it's definitely a nice component for people because, they, not every bike fit will fix every issue, and sometimes we
Hmm.
do have underlying issues too that kind of are masquerading as on the bike issues. So,
Hmm.
it's nice to be able to look at things through a clinical lens, and not see not see everything as a nail. So, you don't
Right.
want to just be a hammer. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And I imagine it potentially goes both ways, right? You have a patient who comes in and they say, "Oh, I have this pain." And you say, "Well, have you considered your bike fit?"
yep,
Versus,
yep,
and then you also have people coming in for a bike fit. And you're like, "Well, we can do this, but really, you also kind of need to work on this in terms of like
exactly.
physical therapy or whatever the case may be."
Exactly. Yeah, I have patients become bike fit clients, and bike fit clients become patients.
Hmm.
The kind of physical therapy side of things, I think, is it really offers a lot, and it's a good blend and of offerings between that and the bike fit. I'd say, like, again, like, I am a chiropractor by trade, but uh, most people would describe me as more of a mix between a chiropractor and a physical therapist.
Hmm.
So there's,
Yeah.
placing a big emphasis on rehab and corrective exercise. It gets really good results. It's good for patients because it's empowering.
Hmm.
They're not reliant upon a provider to fix something for them every day or every week
Hmm.
or every month.
Yeah.
Um, and then and then also during the bike fit process, there's education about bike fit. We're chatting a lot of the time, so keying them in on things that they can do on their own with their bike fit, things that they can
Hmm.
recognize. Say they do have to, something, they have a crash or they have to change a component or something. There's some things that they can look for that I educate them on um, that they'll be able to do on their own. My goal is for them to not be totally reliant upon me.
Right.
I'm helping them navigate this,
Yeah.
and that's kind of where I want to. That's where I want to stay.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sounds like a really excellent approach, and clearly, yeah, you know a lot about this topic and are passionate, not just because you're a writer, but I mean, this is what you do. This is your your job is to make
Yes,
sure that people are able to move and to be comfortable physically, no matter what they're doing.
yeah, it's a livelihood and a passion for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Adam, for taking the time to talk to us. I learned a ton, and I'm sure our listeners learned enough, but they're probably also going to have more questions for you as well. So there is definitely more info at apexchirobellingham.com when we'll have that link for you in the description. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.